Good afternoon, everybody. If you can hear me, there are several people to join, so we'll take just a few minutes, or maybe a minute or so. So we're just going to be letting people in. So just bear with me for a second. So whilst we're waiting, I'll just reflect upon the fact that it's a lovely day. That this weekend was the one we planned to use Preston School, and the intention was to use Preston School both inside and outside. So the sunshine would have been fabulous to have been using, but hey ho, COVID came along and we've had to learn lots of new tricks. And I think, I feel like we've done very well in the circumstances, because we completely turned around our planning, decided that it was worth a think of doing it again in May time, committed ourselves in June, and have been able to deliver. So, on behalf of everybody from SLH, Sustainable Living in the Heatons, well done all. So over the next few minutes, you'll be seeing a video from a wonderful young cameraman and director, Ryan Cooper. So you'll do appreciate what he's done. I think he's a wonderful job for us. And can I mention two things? So the rest of today, where we've got the fight against food waste on at 3 o'clock, and at 4:15, more fun and more affordable, electric cars in all of their glory. Some, mainly glory, but some of the glitches too. And then on Sunday, if you're joining us, there's Ideas for Business in the Heatons. That starts at 1:30. Then we're then doing Buying Green in the Heatons, with again another great piece of video work. Creating a Warmer Energy Efficient Home is the third session up. And then finishing with a closing session where we've got Nav Mishra, the MP, who's going to be talking to the 3 young people from our commission. And we'll finish them with a wonderful closing poem by Beth Whitehead, which has again been mounted into a video by Ryan. And again, something not to miss. We'll have it on the website actually from Monday. So if you do miss it, please go and visit this. So I think we're ready to start. So, right. So this is planning a building project and make it green. And can I introduce, we've got 2 individuals helping us with this. So I'm Mel Godfrey. I'm volunteer for Sustainable Living in the Heatons, and I'm taking you through this for the next hour or so. And we're helped in this by Steve Howarth, local house owner, who has done his own project, and it's one which we felt so inspired with that we thought we ought to show it to you, which you'll see in a video in about 10 minutes time. And then after that, Sarah Darwin, local architect and somebody who's qualified in passive house design, is going to take us through how to do a project and how to make it green. So next, please. So first things first, housekeeping notes. If you're not familiar with Zoom webinar, then you need to know that only our speakers and our panelists have the ability to use their microphones. What we'd like you to do, though, if you've got questions, is to hover your mouse over the ribbon at the bottom of the screen in front of you, and you'll see there's a Q&A button. If you've got questions, would you please pop your questions into that? There's also another button, which is called the chat button, and that's for putting any commentaries and any ideas that you wish to share. And please do that. Then after the webinar, you will be able to recommend to your friends and family, if you've enjoyed it, that they can also watch it, and it will be uploaded to YouTube in order to do that. Next, please. So why are we doing this? Sustainable Living in the Heatons has been in existence for about 10 years now. And it's a frustration amongst members that sustainability now seems to be a slogan without a meaning. In the past 10 years, we've seen increasingly urgent messages from scientists and the UN about the trajectory we and the planet are on. A transition of sorts is taking place, but witnessed the end of the use of coal and the rapid rise and the deployment of renewable technology in the UK. Things are happening, but really the pace of change does not match the jeopardy. Technological innovations definitely within our grasp, but nationally and worldwide, the leadership is not matching it. Next, please. So what do we do? Do we despair? Or do we just do our best in our personal lives and as businesses and as community to influence and make those changes happen? This festival is here to help you answer that question. What more can I do? And hopefully it will offer you answers to what we can all do differently, both as consumers, which is a really important way of exercising our voice, but also as citizens. And to that reason, we've been pleased to have both Andy Burnham, the Mayor of Greater Manchester on the first weekend, and we finish tomorrow with Nav Mishra, our MP for Stockport. Next, please. So we start with dilemmas that you will be facing if you are planning to do a project, domestic or otherwise. And that's the running order. Then we intend to show you our grand home, the one that Steve has done. Then we'll get into a longer explanation through Sarah about how to achieve great design and a green outcome. And in all of this, we want to get best value for your project, both for your pocket, that's during construction, and in the long-term running costs. And if we achieve that, then of course, that will be beneficial to the planet anyway. Next, please. So the Green Buildings Council, in a report a couple of years ago, reckons that the UK's 28 million homes really are not future ready. And by that, not ready for the future that the government has said we should have by 2050 to be carbon neutral. Our homes aren't compatible with climate change future, and they're going to substantially undermine the UK's ability to reduce its carbon emissions if we don't start changing. Overall, the British, or the English, sorry, housing stock has an average EPC rating of only D. That means most homes are leaking energy badly. They're incurring higher energy bills than they need to, and there's a whole set of associated detrimental impacts for many people. However, change is upon us. Next, please. That change isn't necessarily one we want to hear about, because it's about space heating costing us more. North Sea gas will be running out. Many of you may not know that boilers for North Sea gas will no longer be installed in new homes from 2025. That's not very far away. And at Greater Manchester level, the projections have been made for us all, suggests that we have to have much more energy efficient homes, a lot more electrical heating from heat pumps in our homes, and that there will be some boilers, and those boilers will be those that are using hydrogen gas by 2038. Next, please. So there's an energy challenge going on. The retrofitting of our existing homes is the biggest challenge in transitioning the UK built economy, a built environment that has ever been. At a personal level, most of us can only afford to improve our energy efficiency over time. So as we repair and improve our homes, there's an opportunity on each occasion to do a little bit each time to improve the way that we green our properties. So we hope this presentation is going to help you do that. Next, please. So within the Greater Manchester energy targets, and bearing in mind Greater Manchester's seeking to make the city carbon neutral by 2038, they have taken an approach they call the fabric first approach. This is about building design and reducing the amount of energy required to heat a building. They say the first priority is to prevent heat loss through walls, floors, roofs, and opening. To do this, it requires greater and better performing insulation, an airtight build, and design to avoid thermal bridging. So what do all those words mean? Well, I want to give you an example which is actually comes back to us personally as individuals as to what those words do mean. So first of all, can you imagine you're on Heaton More Common at the moment? It's November, there's a cold wind blowing. So we're outside, we feel cold. What do we do first? We check our clothing. We consider how we're dressed. And if you were in your own home, you'd be doing this in a different way, but in the same way. You'd be looking around you and checking doors, windows, gaps and drafts. And broadly speaking, you'd then be taking a fabric first approach. Next, please. So that didn't make us feel any warmer. So we're still cold. What we do, we then put a jumper or a fleece on. And in our home, we would call that adding insulation. So in other words, we're putting a warmer, something warm against our skin where what before was cold. Once again, we're still not feeling warm enough. So we continue to feel the cold and we put a jacket on and we zip it up to retain the heat. And still we're feeling cold in certain edges, around the neck, around the hands. So what do? We put a scarf and gloves on. And that is what we then called avoiding cold bridging. So there's the three words that I'm introducing you to: insulation, air tightness, and the avoidance of cold bridging. Next, please. That's understanding heat loss 3. But what about moisture? We have to consider moisture in all this. So if you were exercising outdoors, that was why you're on the common, you'd also take measures to ensure that any sweat and evaporation you were making could be carried away. And we do this to avoid both smelling and condensation occurring in our clothing. In your home, you'd be doing this as well, but you'd be doing it to avoid smells from cooking, from moisture from baths, showers, and washing. So we do that at home usually by opening windows or putting mechanical extraction on to take this damp or the smelly air out of the house. Next, please. So most older homes, I think we've said this now, they leak considerable amounts of air all of the time. Certainly anything built in the Heatons that hasn't had a considerable amount of work done to it in recent times, that was built before probably about 1960, would be leaking considerable amounts of air. And actually even some of the newer properties to the end of the 20th century are still considerably leaking. So we've got to do more to improve the ability of our homes to retain heat. And that is through this combination of measures of insulation, air tightness, and this elimination of cold bridges. And we can do that and avoid the moisture problems if we apply some foresight to the way we go about our project. This requires knowledge, good design, and you will then find that you can achieve a comfortable home without all sorts of difficulties. Next, please. So what now follows is a video. This is how one Heatons resident, Steve Howarth, has risen to the challenge of creating a light and spacious home, one that at the same time is outstandingly energy efficient. We hope this will inspire you. Video, please.
My name's Steve Howarth. I live here in Norris in Stockport, and this is my self-build eco home. Since a young child, I've always been surrounded by the building trade. My father and the grandfather both builders, so we always moved house being developed. I've owned 2 houses myself, which we bought and developed from scratch, complete refurbishments. But it was always my passion to build my own home. So with that background knowledge, I took that on really and decided that one day I would build my own home, and when the opportunity came here, that's when the process began. Once I decided that the opportunity might arise that we could build our own house, we started doing a lot of research, and I just wanted to build a house that was as environmentally friendly, and which meant one of the main aspects would be that it would be as energy efficient as possible. So to build an energy efficient house, you have to build a super insulated home. So one thing led to the other. Once we decided we wanted to build a super energy efficient home, I really looked a lot into the passive house process, which was designed in Germany in the Passive House Institute, which is all about building super insulated, energy efficient homes. Once we decided that was the process we were going to go, I was put in touch with a local architect, Sarah Darwin, who had just graduated in Passive House Institute. And so we got together, and that was a process that we started on. That was the route we went. So Sarah designed the house, and it was all about its functionality and fabric first approach. So that was really instigated what the house would be built from and what it would look like. As I mentioned earlier, the house is a timber frame construction. It was built using structural insulation panels, or SIPs as they're known in the trade. A SIPs panel is basically compressed insulation between 2 8x4 boards of OSB. The reason why we chose SIPs panels is because of the speed of construction and also because of their super insulation value. Basically, a SIPs panel is erected around the house, and in this case we then added an extra 120mm insulation on the outside and another 80mm on the inside, which, as you can see, gives us a wall thickness of near to 0.5 meters thickness. That's what creates super insulation homes. As well as the walls, windows are an important factor in highly insulated homes for airtightness. In this house we've used triple glazed windows throughout. The result has been that the house is very, very warm. Heating really, the temperature here never drops below 18 degrees, winter or summer, which means the heating invariably only ever comes on for 3 to 4 months every year, and it just tops up. So it's very energy efficient, which means that we have been qualified for renewable heat incentives and the feed-in tariffs, which means that our net bills for the is less than £12 a month. But our standing order payments are £42 a month, but we get £30 back in feed-in tariff and renewable energy incentives. Had we built it homes earlier, we would have been in positive equity on it, positive bills. They would, the energy companies would have been paying us. Just too late. I think if ever you're going to take on a major project like a major extension, or especially a home build, it's all about doing the research. It's not something you can do. You don't necessarily have to have a lot of knowledge. I had a lot of understanding of the building trade because I'd grown up around it, but I'm not a builder, I'm not a tradesman. So it's all about doing the research and about the products that are available to you. I went down the timber frame route. We use all modern technologies like the air source heat pump, like the mechanical ventilation unit, wooden frame construction, because I did my research and wanted to go that route. It meant going to a lot of trade fairs, it meant reading a lot of books, a lot of home improvement magazines, watching all the home builder programs on TV, and then making contacts. Sarah was the first one, my architect, and she helped me research what was available in the market and who could provide this stuff. So I would say to anyone, research, research, research. Building a sustainable home, it was also important to us that we got away from using fossil fuels and only use renewable energies. As part of that, therefore, we chose to go off gas, and therefore we only have an electrical supply. The electric for powering the hot water and the heating is driven by an air source heat pump, which is a popular choice in sustainable homes. Plus we have over a 3,000 watt array of solar, which is fitted on the southwest facing roof, which generates a high proportion of our electric on warm days such as today. Another aspect of a super insulated home is that you have to then use an air source heat pump, which basically is an air exchanger, which means that we have to then draw in air from outside the building and keep replenishing the air inside so that we don't get stale and stagnant air. Thank you for watching, and I hope it be useful to you when you embark on your next grand design.
Wow, that was wonderful. A real challenge to us. So just bear it a second. Right. I'd now like to introduce Sarah Darwin, who's the architect responsible for the home you've just seen, and is doing, as we speak, a number of extensions in other buildings, both here and around the northwest of England. So over to you, Sarah.
Thanks, Mel. I hope everyone can hear me okay. So first of all, I'd just like to thank Steve and Mel, his wife, for being fantastic clients, coming along and asking for the house built to Passive House standards. Yeah, it was a super project to work on. I know that you're probably thinking, well, I'm not building my own home, and we really were trying to emphasize this session that you know, if you're doing a project, it's basically working along these principles though, because Passive House can also be applied to existing dwellings, doesn't have to be new build. And really my message today is to talk about fabric first, being the really essential part of it. So five basic principles are super insulation, as Steve was saying. We've got a minimum insulation that's required for the building. It might mean that you need more insulation depending on the form of your building. So a bungalow will need more insulation than a terraced house because it has more external surfaces. Triple glazed windows are part of the essential requirements. Also an MVHR system, mechanical ventilation system with heat recovery. And air tightness is something that we're going to talk about today, which is maybe something that's not always mentioned so much, but we lose a lot of heat through filtration through the building fabric. And then finally, perhaps a new phrase that you'll learn today, thermal bridges. So we have to design a thermal bridge free technical solution. So next, please. Okay, so we all know that the home renovation industry is booming. There's skips on every street and builders wagons all over the place. Every bit of renovation that anyone does gives you an opportunity to look at how you could increase the level of energy efficiency of your home. So 3 things really that we'd like you to consider when you're doing these projects is to think about insulation. Can you increase that insulation of a room that you're doing? Air tightness and ventilation. And I think what we're trying to show today is that those 3 things go hand in hand, and we have to consider all of these things when doing these projects. Next, please. So yes, Mel said I am working on a number of projects. This is a project that I did a few years ago, and I was lucky that the owners had bought a house. They weren't moving in. They were in rented accommodation, so they were able to look at the whole house, and we did a lot of measures, roof insulation, walls, and even the floors we insulated. There's a lot of products on the market these days, so if you want super thin insulation, there's vacuum insulated panels. So this house, we were able to really go back to the bare bones and bring it up to modern specification. But we're not always so lucky that you can have that full run at it, because you're obviously normally living in the house while people are doing the work. Next slide, please. So I think the first thing to think about is insulation. It's about insulating as much as you can when you have the opportunity. Next, please. Okay, so what I call this is the tea cozy effect. If you think about when you put a tea cozy on your teapot, if people still have those, what you're doing is you're putting a nice uniform layer of insulation all the way around your teapot. Now the thermal bridge in that case is your handle and the spout. That's breaking up the nice continuous layer. We have to, as architects, we have to think about the junctions. So the diagram there is showing you heat flow through a parapet wall. So that is a difficult junction because we've got to get the insulation to be continuous around 2 planes. And the junctions are really important because that is where you get these gaps in insulation. And the photograph there is showing you an infrared survey of a building. On the ceiling, you can just about make out the timber battens, which are thermal bridges through the insulation in the ceiling, and the corners often are the bits where there's gaps. So you can see the colour there change, which shows that's actually heat loss in a higher concentration. Next, please. So you're going to insulate, but where's the best place to put your insulation? Ideally, and the easiest way to do this would be to put it on the outside of your building. So again, it's like the tea cozy. The advantages of that is that you're not losing any space inside your house. It causes less concerns in terms of building physics. So it's actually, what we talk about is trying to keep the structure of your building warm. So it's like putting your coat on or your big woolly jumper. And it also makes it easier to avoid any thermal bridges because it's going right, you're wrapping it round on the outside of the building. However, we live in the Heatons, and there's often conservation concerns or listed buildings, and you might not be able to just put insulated render on the outside of your building. Next, please. So so if you're in a conservation area, you can't change the appearance of the outside of your property, you're probably looking at putting internal insulation in. Now this is more tricky. It has to be really well thought out, and there are some disadvantages. One of those being the loss of space in your room. So you might want to put 100 mil of insulation in there, but you don't want to actually physically lose that space off a living room. So you've got to balance those things. The other thing is that thermal bridges that we've talked about, again, it's harder to achieve those. You've got to really think about the details, because every time you come to a floor, if you're just insulating up to the ceiling, you would have a break at every floor level, which is something you want to avoid. So it's just, it needs more planning, needs to talk to your contractor or whoever's going to carry that out, just to make sure that they have just thought about all those things and don't leave you with any problems afterwards. And workmanship, you know, you've got to make sure that the quality on site is good. So you probably need somebody just to be having a little overseeing for you. Next, please. And the other thing about every insulation and all these measures, it's about thermal comfort in your home. And so without getting too technical about it, radiant temperature asymmetry, that is where you've got a temperature difference, and you will feel a temperature difference of more than 4 Kelvin. So we design to make sure that you don't get that. So if you've got a warm ceiling and cold feet, or if you've got one side of your body is colder than the other, you will start to feel that. You'll feel drafts and things. And the classic one is your windows. So a single glazed window, even if you've got your heating on, if you've not got any heat source next to that window, you're going to feel a temperature difference next to it, because the radiant heat is just going to be much colder. So in Passive House, we're looking to achieve triple glazing, because it takes the temperature of that surface up so that you won't feel this difference. Obviously, sometimes you might not be able to go as far as triple glazing, but even double glazing will give you a better, a smaller temperature difference, but you might actually have to supplement that by some extra heating below that window. Next, please. The next thing I want to talk about is moisture control. Now, this is where it does get tricky. Myself, I have to sort of think about these things from first principles. But when you start adding insulation to your home, or when you start thinking about air tightness, it does start to alter the balance of your heating and ventilation. So these are things that we have to consider. It's not just doing one in isolation. So when you're getting low temperatures in a room, or even the whole house, there can be problems with excessive moisture. And this can be a cause of dampness and mold, which we know is not good for your health, amongst other things, and not good for the structure. So if you then start to make your home more airtight, but if you're still in a poorly insulated house, too much airtightness can then create a stuffy and unpleasant internal environment. So we're going to need to think about ventilation, opening windows. So it's a balance, and there will need to be adjustments made to make sure the environment inside is good. Next, please. So a little bit about humidity and relative humidity. I'm trying to make this as simple as possible. Air can hold a certain amount of moisture, and colder air can hold a smaller amount. So if you've got a set amount of water vapor at a lower temperature, that might be 100% relative humidity. But as the temperature goes up, the air can actually hold more vapor. So if you're keeping water vapor the same and you're raising the temperature of the air, then you'll see that the relative humidity will go down. Could you just go on to the next slide, please? So just going back over that concept, the amount of water vapor that air can hold is called the absolute humidity. Relative humidity is the percentage of water held by the air compared to its total capacity. And when air reaches the maximum amount of vapor it can hold, that's called saturation. And this is where vapor then condenses out of the air. And temperature, as we see, affects relative humidity. So if you've got a constant amount of water vapor, as the temperature rises, relative humidity decreases, which might be a good thing. But what you've got to note is that, you know, if the relative humidity is too low, it feels dry, the air feels dry. So there is a range which we're trying to work to. So we want relative humidity in your home to be between 35 and 65%. Next, please. So we have to consider what the sources of moisture in the building are and how we control those things. So people are one of the main sources, because we're breathing and perspiring, we're cooking, washing clothes, drying. If you don't have an external vent on your clothes dryer, that's going back into the atmosphere. Dishwashing, boiling the kettle, and bathing. That's what we generate as it being in our houses. But also the building itself, there's moisture which we need before doing any renovation works. You need to consider is, you know, are your gutters leaking and are they saturating your external walls? Is there groundwater? Is there rising damp? Do you need to put some more gullies outside your property so the water isn't just splashing up and saturating the external walls? And then there's condensation on surfaces. We've all seen that on single glazing, where you end up with a pool of water in the morning at the bottom of your windows, and that could start rotting the timber. Next, please. So an example of water vapour and how that works is if you're having a shower in an unheated bathroom, you generate steam. So the warm water vapour is held in the air. When it starts to mix with the cold air in the bathroom, this results in the water vapour condensing out into a liquid form. As it cools down, it can come into contact with a cold surface or colder air. A cold surface in the building will begin to show dampness as condensation forms and will become mould. I've certainly got a little patch on my bathroom ceiling where there's no insulation, and that's caused by condensation. Next, please. So, as we've moved on, I think insulation is increasing and it has an effect. So just starting with probably what a lot of us are sitting in at this moment, Victorian homes. They're cold, drafty, and the heat loss through the walls is quite considerable. But it's been okay because there's a lot of natural filtration. You've got gaps in the structures. Your basement is probably like a fridge because the cold walls in contact with the ground, and also they probably don't get any solar gain. Your single glazing is letting in a nice draft. Your chimneys are taking a lot of the heat that you're pumping into it to keep warm straight up the chimney. So then in the 80s, we started to think about insulating. We've got cavity walls, some insulation in there, and we might have some nice loft insulation. But we weren't thinking about air tightness then. We probably didn't bother insulating the floors, and there's certainly sort of gaps around there, and suspended timber floors is taking out a lot of heat. We started to think about ventilation and putting in a fan, but often people turn them off because they're very noisy. So we're starting to think about what we need to do, but there's still a lot of problems really. The physics of it is not quite there. So today what we're hoping to aim for is a super insulated house, but apart from that nice continuous layer of insulation that we've got there, we also need to think about air tightness so that the moist air that we're generating inside is not moving out into the structure of the building, causing damage. So the dotted line there is showing a nice continuous airtight line. But then we also then need to think about ventilation and ventilating in a more intelligent way, about bringing in fresh air and extracting from the wet areas. Next, please. So yes, this is the red line. So as architects, we like to draw a nice continuous dotted red line on the sections. And this is something that helps for the contractors and any tradesmen on site, if they all understand where that airtight line is. It can be a number of different materials. It could be the plaster on the walls internally, or it might be a membrane. There's a lot of intelligent membranes on the market now. And it might be the concrete slab of your floor. But it's very useful to just establish exactly where that is, so everybody understands that. Next, please. So compared to building regulations, passive houses probably are about 10 times more airtight because it needs to be and we're not really there yet with the British building regulations. If you think about a 50p coin, that is about the total size of air gaps allowed in a dwelling to meet the airtightness testing that is carried out. And the reason for this is, if up on the right there, the diagram shows you a 1 millimetre wide gap. That can mean there's 360 grams of water per day moving into the structure of the building. So clearly we don't want that to be an uncontrolled thing. We're going to take out. We're going to ventilate the building in a positive manner. Next, please. So ventilation systems, I keep mentioning we need to ventilate. So I think you saw in Steve's video, the mechanical ventilation heat recovery system, MVHR. And what that does is it takes the warm air from the wet rooms, from the bathrooms and the kitchen. It extracts that, it takes it across a heat exchanger, and it pre-warms fresh air that's coming into the building, which is then ducted into the habitable spaces. So you're not wasting that heat from those spaces, you're using it to preheat. And because the air coming into the building is preheated, you're not getting a draft anywhere. It's just pleasant, fresh air. So you don't have to open your windows. People often say to me, oh, you can't open your windows in a passive house, but you can open them if you want to. But if you have them closed, you're still getting fresh air. And the other thing is that the MVHR will have a filter on it. So for people that suffer with asthma and hay fever, they've reported very positive results from this system. Next, please. Oh, and this is just a diagram, sorry, of the actual heat exchanger. So you see the fresh air coming in. It doesn't mix with any extracted air. It just goes across this heat exchanger, and then it is pre-warmed and is into the supply ducts. And then the external air, again, takes the heat out of it, but it then is just exhausted out through the extract grills. Next, please. You might not be putting in the full MVHR system, but there are still quite a lot of intelligent systems available. Demand ventilation is one of those, where it's an extract system with a central fan, very low acoustic, fairly insulated fans. It extracts from the wet room in the same way, but the air intake is through your windows in the same way that a trickle vent works, but this is a bit more sophisticated. It has a humidity blade, which once it senses humidity in the air, it opens the vent, and the air will come into the room. It will be directed towards the ceiling, so you won't get this cold down draft as well. But just aside from this system, there are also single fans on the market that do also heat recovery as well. And also you now can get very low noise fans. So I think quite often we don't like turning on the bathroom fans because they're so noisy, but there are much better products on the market now. Next, please. So we're just going to run through some sort of common home improvements that people carry out and things you might be able to consider. The first is a loft conversion, and then we're going to look at kitchen extension and internal remodeling. So before you start, prioritise what you can towards your building fabric upgrade, and try to optimise your budget in terms of finding out what the most effective measures that you can achieve for that. That might be asking someone to do some heat loss calculations to actually measure and see in terms of what you get for your money, which would be the best solution. And then get the basics right. So insulation, ventilation, and thinking about moisture. If it's 3 things you take away from this, I think those 3 words are very important. So ask the question when the work's being done. And if you can, obtain independent expert advice. companies will always want to sell you something, so be wary speaking to the manufacturers as they are selling you something. Next, please. So the most basic one, I suppose, is loft insulation. If you're not even doing any renovations, sometimes you probably don't have the maximum amount of insulation at the moment in your property. So when you're doing this, you might want to think about, there's these great storage systems so that they don't squash down that insulation that you put in. So they're kind of like on a rail system attached to your joist, ceiling joist. So you can still use your loft for storage, but you can put a lot of insulation in there. And then also you want to think about your loft hatch. You can get insulated loft hatch with air tightness as well, so you're not just puncturing all that great insulation you put in there. And when you do insulate, again, thinking about the air tightness, is your ceiling airtight? Are there gaps around the edges? Because you don't want the moisture from your home passing up into that space. Next, please. You might be planning a loft conversion, in which case you're insulating along the rafter level. The illustration here is using a nice flexible natural material. It could be mineral wool, or it could be glass fibre. It's flexible, so it fits really well between the rafters, so you don't end up with any gaps. And then underdraw that with an additional layer, probably of a high performance, maybe a PIR insulation, because your rafters are thermal bridges. The thermal conductivity of the rafters is not as good as your insulation. So if you can get another layer underneath, only a thinner layer, then that will also help achieve a very good U value. And again, thinking about air tightness, you can actually install an airtight membrane. So on the right there is a photograph of an Intello air tightness membrane. I say it's intelligent because it does also allow the structure to breathe, which is, you know, the products are always advancing, and there's a lot of really good products out there if you want to research those things. Next, please. So a lovely couple came to me asking to do a kitchen extension for them, but obviously once you look at one thing, you have to look at the whole house, and it became apparent there was a number of areas we could improve as well. The photograph is of the loft, and the original battens there with just nice bits of mortar falling out, but no roofing membrane at all, and probably a very minimum amount of insulation in there. So in this case, we actually replaced the roof covering, which meant we could use a high performance wind tight breather membrane below the roof tiles, and we could insulate the whole roof, which was going to put a nice warm hat on the building. The windows were all single glazed. The conservation area officer obviously had a lot to say about this. We did put it on the planning application. We were able to use a conservation style triple glazed timber window that the conservation officer was happy with. So although you don't have to use triple glazing, I would always suggest that you ask for a quote for triple glazing as well, because demand is increasing and the cost is coming down. Next, please. So we were lucky to have the original plans of this building, and it turned out that the kitchen had once been the wash house and coal room, and it had a solid concrete floor. So when we were doing the extension, which replaced a flat roof garage, we also took up the concrete floor in the original kitchen area and put down an insulated new floor. So doing the work, doing the extension gave an opportunity to actually take that floor out and put a new one down. Sometimes we think, oh, we can't do that, but actually the cost, while you've got diggers on site, is not so great. But you've got a good gain there in terms of insulation. Other things we were able to do then was to introduce new mechanical ventilation for the kitchen, a new kitchen and utility room, and triple glazed bifold doors, which I'll show you a bit later, and insulation in the new walls of the kitchen. You don't have to just stick to building regulations minimum. You can go a little bit further, because if you're doing it at that stage, you know, it doesn't cost that much more. So always ask the question, is how high can you insulate your walls? Next, please. So this is just as the kitchen extension was being built, it's showing you there the insulation that was going in, but there's also, if you can just see next to the trusses, is a little bit of the air tightness membrane that was going in. Now this was a little bit new for the builders, and they weren't any specialists or anything. They had to get used to all the taping that's required. But you know, if you ask the right questions, and if you've got a good builder, they should be prepared to look into new ways of doing things, because things are always changing. What you want is somebody that's going to work with you. And this is just a section through there to show how we had insulation between the rafters and an air tightness membrane, and then another layer of insulation below that. And as it was a kitchen, you're going to get a lot of moisture in the air, so it is important that you've got air tightness and you're not allowing that moist air to move into the structure. How am I doing for time? Please tell me to hurry up if you need to. We had well insulated walls, and it was solid fill. One of the reasons we prefer solid filled insulation in the walls is because when you get partial fill, it's got to be very well put in, and you can get gaps behind it. If you see on the photograph there, if you get those gaps with the thermal bypass, you will be losing a lot of your heat just through the convection currents that occur in those cavities. So you'll be spending a lot of money on your extension, but you might not be getting the performance that you're looking for if the quality isn't as good. Next, please. So yeah, this was just to show that when we re-roofed this house, there was this small little cupboard, dark and damp, but with the roof now re-insulated, and we put a roof light in there, that became a nice warm office space. And also just to say about the windows, window companies should give you samples and allow conservation officers to look at them, but you can get performance as well as heritage. That's what I'd say. Next, please.
10 minutes, Sarah.
Okay, all right. I don't know how I'm doing. Oh, we need to go fast. So this is just the final kitchen with the bifold doors, which are triple glazed timber bifolds. Next, please. And yes, again, that's the re-roofed property with the heritage windows there from the rear. Next, please. So if you're only just doing a little bit of internal modelling, I'd say a lot of our houses in the area, the Victorian houses, have got suspended timber floors. This is a good opportunity to put some insulation, if you can, from your basements below, but you might just have a crawl space. A good way to do this is to hold the insulation in place with a breather membrane, because this does allow the structure still to breathe. But I would suggest putting in additional vents into that floor void below, and to think about any services that's running through the void, that they will need insulating, because they'll be much colder once you put the insulation in. Next, please. So when you're thinking of your whole house retrofit, or even just a little bit of retrofit, think about the maintenance that you might need to do before you start any work. I know this is the really boring bit, but if you've got any damp or any leaks, now's the time to look at that before any thermal upgrading starts. Next, I'd say consider moisture. The passage of moisture. If you can get a survey done by an independent company, I'd stress that, because again, people selling damp-proof products, I want to sell those to you, but so if you can get somebody independent to do that, and look at the things you need to remedy before you start. And then ventilation, it's crucial, although the older buildings have a natural ventilation through the leakiness, you will be altering that as you start to put insulation in, and you do need to think about whether you need to upgrade your ventilation measures in the house to maintain an acceptable level of humidity. Next, please. Think about your materials. With older buildings, I would really consider thinking about using breathable insulation, and there's a lot of products on the market which we're happy to make suggestions afterwards if people want to know about that. And then sequencing of the work. If you can't do all the work in one go, which most of us can't, do think and consult with professionals in terms of how you're going to stage those, because if you put your external insulation on and you don't do your windows till later, then you're going to possibly be undoing some of that work that you spent a lot of money on. So you really need to have a plan on how you're going to do this. And then supervision is so important. Again, try to use somebody that's independent and going to make sure that the quality of workmanship is good. You pay a lot of money for these works, and you want to make sure that that thermal performance is going to be working as it's supposed to. Next, please. People are probably aware there's a Green Homes grant that is starting imminently, and you can apply up till the end of March. You're going to be eligible for a voucher. You have to pay some contribution towards that, but we think it's going to be a maximum of £5,000 contribution. I think you get up to 2/3 of the cost. The aim of the scheme is to promote energy efficiency and boost the economy by creating jobs. You have to be installing one of the primary items, and these are the insulation, solid wall, cavity wall, underfloor, loft or roof insulation, and low carbon heating, such as an air source heat or ground source heat pump, and solar thermal systems. I think what we'd say is do look into these, be cautious. It's a self-certifying scheme for the work, approved installers only. And so if you're doing larger works that might not tie in so well, please talk to your contractor about how you might take advantage of those grants that are available. Next, please. You're eligible if you're an owner-occupier. Long leaseholders are eligible, and shared ownership properties as well. Landlords of private rented and social domestic housing can also use the scheme, and park home owners. But if you're a renter, I'm afraid you can't access the scheme, but you should talk to your landlord to see if you can actually persuade them to make some of the improvements as well. There is a tool on the Simple Energy Advice website, which will give you an idea of what improvements you might be able to get and the help, and they'll direct you to how to apply for that. Next, please. So my top tips, first of all, I would say understand the challenges that your home is presenting you with, and know what you don't know, what to ask. And make decisions from a position of strength via advice or your own research. I think your own research, as Steve said, it's really valuable. You will know what you want, and you will know what questions you need to ask. You'll know the quality of the products that you want to put into your project, and this applies when you're looking for contractors. And as I say, they don't have to have had the experience, but they should be willing to listen to you and take on board what you're looking for, really. So think about your budget from the start and tailor your expectations. Think about where you can best spend that money to get the best results. And projects are time consuming, but if you think it through and prevent avoidable delays or avoidable abortive work, I'd say, is one of the critical things. And so planning it out is really necessary. Next, please. So I've mentioned independent advice a number of times, and I would just give a plug here to Mel Godfrey, and this is his website, warminwinter.co.uk. If you want an assessment, you know, do look around for an independent person to give you advice. Please don't just rely on the manufacturers. Thank you. Oops.
Thank you, Sarah. That was great. I think that was extremely lucid and you did a great job for us all there. So we're on to questions now. So can I start with one for Steve, please? If Steve's could be unmuted. So the question for Steve: the house looks amazing. If you were to go back to the start, would you do anything differently? Also, what's your favourite thing about the house?
Now, there was 3 questions in there, wasn't there?
Yeah, yeah. Someone's being greedy.
so give me them again, one by one.
So if you were to go back to the start, would you do anything differently?
Differently? No, I probably wouldn't have done that. I think in any project, once you get a project finished and you live with it, there are always little things you think, maybe I could have done this, could have done that. And I think that's the same in anybody's home. I think every 12 months your tastes change or your thoughts change on various things, and you think I could have possibly done some things a little bit better, but 99.9% of it I'm totally delighted with, really. The main thing was, when we finished it, was its functionality, and it performs exactly as we wanted it to.
Excellent.
Favourite part of the house, funny enough, the room we like the most is the family bathroom. We got this family bathroom that just looks stunning, but we never go in it because we've got an ensuite. So everybody else enjoys it and we don't really. So that's the advantage of having an ensuite bathroom. But I'm a big music fan, so I've got the Sonos system built in, so the music system, having it all built in is great. But the house is just so comfortable and so bright. It's a joy.
Yeah. So what's your favourite thing then? Is it being bright?
I think just do you know what? I was brought up in a big Victorian home with single glazed sash windows, and I don't remember any time ever being warm in the house. I remember curtains blowing in the winter. I remember the ice on the inside of the windows, and just to have a home now where you know the comfort. It's a joy. It's a joy. And so it's going to be a lovely home to grow old in, actually.
Yeah. Okay, thanks. I'm going to move on to Sarah now. So Sarah, a couple of questions about draft reduction and budget ways of being eco. Any thoughts?
Yes, I'm sorry we haven't covered that too much of that today because there's so much to go through. But obviously there are a lot of draft proofing products out there for your windows. If you can't, you can't actually replace them. I can't think of anything to sort of suggest off the top of my head in terms of a product saying that, because mostly I suppose I am involved in changing things over. What I would say is, if you are, say, putting in new windows, is to actually ask, what are you going to do about the edges, taping them and filling. My father had some new PVC windows in recently, and I phoned up the company and said, what are you going to do in terms of mastics? What are you going to do in terms of sealing the windows? And they said, oh, we don't do that. We just replace the windows. So, and there's nothing about damp proof courses or anything. So you need somebody overviewing the whole thing. This is why we're not so happy really about the Green Homes grant, because it just means that one specialist comes in, and we're saying it's a lot of things. So sorry, I'm probably not answering your question, but I think floors are something you can look at. Draft reduction, it's sealing up the edges around your skirting boards. You can go around your home and feel the cold. I do that in my office in the back room, and I think I must take the carpet up and seal the floorboards, because that's one of the biggest areas, I would say. You lose a lot of heat through your floors.
Yeah, can I just add a couple of things? Actually understanding how the air is going through your house, and thank you for the plug earlier, Sarah. But I go into so many homes where people don't understand that they have an open chimney. So most homes will have a chimney of somewhere between 12 inches depth and, who knows, 15 to 25 inches wide. That's like having a window open in your house the whole time. So at one level, actually, it's worth, I would say this, wouldn't I? But it's worth having somebody look through your home with a critical eye, preferably with an infrared camera as well. And that's best done in the winter time when the temperature differences are greater inside and outside. And you'll learn so much about the house just through that. Having done that, you can then begin to plan what changes you would make. There's lots of low cost ones in terms of air tightness and the draft reductions, which can make a considerable difference. And then you can start planning the more expensive ones in due course. So next up, please, is a question about relative humidity. How do I measure relative humidity and be sure that I'm working between the 35 and the 65% relative humidity level that, Sarah, you recommended?
Well, what is that gadget that you have, Mel?
It's a thermometer and hygrometer. So.
Hygrometer. Yes, I must admit I don't go into people's homes and measure these things. Looking for damp, but that is a bit of kit that you would need to do to look at. But you don't necessarily have to measure it. I think what you need to do is like Mel was saying, is to think about moisture in your home. I was reading on a website recently that somebody was saying there's no such thing as damp, rising damp, it's all condensation. I don't necessarily agree with that, but there are a lot of condensation issues that we don't think about, and that's why we're aiming to improve insulation of our walls. It's surfaces that are cold are going to have condensation on them when we have anything warm air that's going to hit them. And as we said before, just blocking up all the vents in your home is going to then create a stuffy environment. So it is this balance, unfortunately, isn't just not one answer. And maybe some of it, if you're doing DIY things, it is a little bit trial and error. But it's probably better to think about what is the best measure that you can start with, but it's always going to have a knock-on effect to something else. So really, you do need to plan which measures to do at the same time.
Yeah. Okay. Moving on then to the next question, which is from Diana. Is a heat exchanger expensive? Well,
a mechanical ventilation heat recovery whole system is about £7,000, and that's not installed, that's just supplied, but a plumber can install it. We didn't have a specialist, Steve, did we? It was just the plumbers that put it in. And they are coming down in price. That is a certified product which we have to use in the passive houses, but there are some cheaper options on the market. I'd say shop around if you want to put that in, but they do take up quite a bit of space, so again, it's not always suitable, but there is the demand ventilation as well. I'd say look at that as well if you can't get all the ducts in, and that's quite a good system as well.
Yeah, and then it is more of a challenge to put it into an existing home, because it won't have the spaces at floor level or ceiling level to run these things unless you put in false ceilings. So the whole thing gets to be quite a process, and really it's something you wouldn't contemplate unless you were thinking of doing significant things to the whole of the house. So it's one of those long-term planning things that if you were considering doing it, you'd need to consider how you approach the whole house in order to do that. So okay, the next question up is finding a builder who understands these principles that you talked about, Sarah. How do we go about that?
Well, I'd like someone to help me with that as well.
Steve, you can come in here.
So yes, Steve knows all about this as well. I would just say that actually don't worry too much about whether they have the experience. I would just say if they are open to helping you research, and they don't just kind of suck teeth and say, oh no, that'll cost you. You know, I think it's their attitude is the main thing. Doesn't matter about experience they will work with you.
Steve?
Steve wants to add anything.
Well, I project managed it myself because I couldn't find a local builder who would be prepared to take it all on, because it's all new technology, and a lot of them, sadly, don't keep themselves abreast of the new technologies that are coming out. So I had to source everything individually. Well, Sarah and I sourced everything individually and then brought it all together. And then we had to get the specialist people who were involved in those in doing a lot of the installation. As Sarah said, we were lucky we had a plumber who was quite open to ideas, and we made sure he had all the right instructions and they had to follow them carefully. But you know, you've got to keep a keen eye on them. But a lot of the building trade isn't very up to date with a lot of the new technologies and what's available to them. So that's why, as I said earlier, you've got to do your research and be on top of it. And you need a good architect. I couldn't have done this without Sarah, because she helped me source just about everything that we needed and supported me really, just to make sure I had the confidence. It's that hand-holding bit through the project that's really important.
Yeah, can I add as well? I mean, it's a sad fact that really that, you know, we've got an enormous amount to do with the housing stock over the next 10 or 20 years. And at Greater Manchester level, there's some leadership taking place in this now. So there is intention to train up builders and ensure that the kind of inspections that we've talked about, so people understand their properties before they begin their plans, are beginning to take place. But too little of it. I mean, and it's not something that through apprenticeships or through over the last 10 years or so at least, that builders have been expected to do as they learn their particular trade. So we as a country have a real deficit here. And unfortunately, one of the reasons for doing this particular video and the one tomorrow is for this very purpose, that people understand actually that many of the builders that they're using will come and do their particular trade and have no interest or knowledge of the wider prospects of changing your home for the better and making it less carbon intensive. I'm afraid that's just where we are, and it does force us all to, as individuals, to have to you know, either learn for ourselves or pay somebody to help. It's as simple as that, I'm afraid. So, last question up is from Margaret Connor. Does SLH have any tie with the Manchester Carbon Co-op and the work that they do? And I'll answer this one because the answer is yes, and we are collaborating with them tomorrow, where they are doing a similar presentation to this one, slightly different angle to this, specifically on older properties and retrofits rather than big projects. But it's Anika Kile from the Co-op, one of their members of staff, will be presenting both on behalf of the Co-op, but with SLH in relation to her knowledge of this area, which is extensive. And Anika is a local person as well, so sort of fits out there completely. So I think now we're running to, yes, it's I've got 3 minutes to go, so I'm going to have to now move across to sort of closing comments. So Suze, if you could just drop us back into the PowerPoint, please. So what we hope you'll take away from this is, and this is at the higher level rather than the project level, is that actually there is a transition taking place. I mean, Greater Manchester in particular are beginning to take this really seriously. And you can help drive that transition in what you do through your expenditure as a consumer. I mean, particularly in the building sense, is that, you know, if you took some of the advice that we provided today and ensure that your builder knows what he or she is doing whilst investing in your house, then that can make a big difference to the carbon intensity of your home for the future. But don't forget also that you have a voice as a citizen. and we'd hope that you would also use that as well in the future. We've shared some ideas to follow up, and we hope they do make a difference to you, either however big or small they might be. Each change that you make just knocks a little bit more carbon off the budget that we all need to be bashing away at. So good luck with that. And you can do at least some of this transiting that we've been talking about with others around you. So SLH will be doing things over the next months in relation to talking with other community groups, having shared ideas. So please, watch our website, do get involved. And some of this is better done with others than alone. And I think this whole issue in terms of projects for changing your home is one example that if there's sufficient interest in this, SLH will pick this up and use some of the great talents around the Heatons to help us do that. So next slide. So this is the final slide. So just the references, if you haven't got them already, for Facebook, Twitter, and our website. This will be up on the website as a YouTube recording, so please recommend it to your friends and family. And what will follow will be another conversation about similar things that Carbon Corp are doing on our behalf tomorrow. So if you want to get their view on this, please tune in, and that's at 4:15 on Sunday. So thank you all, and goodbye.
Thanks.